Welcome to Tech Talent Today, where IT leaders share their tough challenges, creative solutions, and latest insights. You'll discover fresh ideas and inspiration here with your host, IT staffing veteran and president of Claremont Technologies, Jody Kulik-Mayer. And now, here's Jody.
Welcome to Tech Talent Today. I'm your host, Jody Kulik-Mayer. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Kirk Brote. Kirk is a seasoned user experience designer with over 20 years of experience in the industry. Throughout his career, Kirk has demonstrated a deep understanding of user-centric design principles and a passion for creating intuitive and engaging experiences for users. His expertise in user research and testing has helped him to uncover insights that inform design decisions and drive innovation. Throughout his career, Kirk has worked with a wide range of clients and industries, from startups to Fortune 500 companies. He is known for his ability to effectively communicate design concepts and strategies to cross-functional teams, and for his ability to work collaboratively with developers and stakeholders to bring designs to life. He is also a sought-after speaker and thought leader, regularly sharing his insights and experiences at industry conferences and events around the globe. Welcome, Kirk. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Jody. It's absolutely wonderful to be here.
Great. So we know each other for a few years now, and you are my go-to person when I have any UX questions. And you were mentioning to me how you gave a talk in 2019 about DesignOps, and it seemed before its time, but now it's becoming mainstream. So what is DesignOps?
Yeah, so, the simplest way to think of design ops or, even that design operations is we're trying to bring the rigor of operations to the practice of design. So kind of where design started in a lot of organizations was, they'd had teams building software for years and years, and then design kind of got grafted into different teams in different ways, with different artifacts, different disciplines. And so as long as that structure always remained the same, then, that solution was okay. What we've seen is that, as design teams became more successful and expanded, all of a sudden, hey, we just noticed you do stuff like we do, but none of it looks the same. None of it looks like it's coming from the same company. It's, hey, this is confusing for our users. And so really that was the attempt to operationalize design to make it smooth and seamless.
Right. So there wasn't like a standard look and feel across?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like any standards within any field, and technology is, no different, is how is that standard interpreted in this case? And so, we had the same style guide, so we knew where to put the logo and we knew what font to use. But after that, it was sort of, each team solving problems on their own. And so things that you sort of assume, well, geez, you add people to the system over there and over there and over there. How come it's totally different in each of those? And naturally, it sort of became, boy, why isn't there some sort of consistent standard, and why do these things work wildly different for all these people?
Right. So when you gave your talk in 2019, what was the response, and I guess how has that changed?
And the response was great in terms of people wanting to know more, and I think one of the challenges was it was early in the sort of adoption curve for a concept like DesignOps. A lot of people had begun to encounter the issues that led to the principles behind DesignOps. Like, hey, what if we just had one library where, drop-down boxes look like this and they always work this way, rather than 17 versions scattered across the entire corporate environment. They had encountered some of the problems, but because they were in the process of expansion, which is, again, one of the things that led to DesignOps, is as design teams were successful, they had more need to do more design for other teams. And so now you have this just organic design sort of environment growing within an organization. And, design ops was sort of that like, okay, gardens are great. Just letting everything grow organically maybe isn't the right way to do it. Maybe hedges are here and flowers are here and vegetables are here. And that's just how this works.
Right. So when you go into a new company, do you find that people are amenable to this when you mention it, or is there pushback?
Yes. It's such a natural solution to a problem that a lot of people have noticed, but design itself tends to be a creative field. And so people within design resist control or sort of having, what they may consider as design shackles, put on them. What do you mean it has to look and feel and act and, where's my creativity? Which, is kind of a common reaction, even amongst design teams, even ones where they recognize that the problem exists. However, I try and frame it in the sense that a sonnet in terms of being a piece of poetry or a poem has a lot of rules that you have to conform to, or it's just not a sonnet. But that doesn't mean you don't have infinite freedom and creativity within the rules of that sonnet. The blues has rules, Impressionist painting has rules. Like all of these systems of expression have rules. Find your creativity within the system, because otherwise it kind of creates chaos, for everyone else. And so if you just think of like a support department at a company that has, 5 or 6 different teams working on designing things, and now all the calls are coming into one place. Well, how do I do this? What system are you in? And what version are you in? And what, because it's changed over time, and it used to do it this way and now this way, because we were organically responding to criticisms from the outside, not saying, we have architectural rules that we follow that, help us determine the boundaries of the things we need to make decisions on, scope and rein it in so that, at the end of the day, it's user experience because it's about the user. And it needs to make sense to them, not to the people who design it or the people who asked for it. But, if you want people to adopt it and use it, it's like it has to actually just work.
Right. That's really the bottom line. You get sort of maybe lost in the weeds in the process. But if you keep your eye on the goal, you'll probably stay on a better path.
Yeah, well, and it was such a foreign thing. I mean, when I first started working in software, the notion of asking users what would work best for them. Like people looked at me like I had 2 or 3 heads. Like, why would we do that? Like, one, we can kind of only program one thing because of the limitations of the environment we're operating in. So it's not like giving them options is going to be better for us. We have to build this thing at the end of the day. And that's the number one concern. But over time, as we've gotten the freedom with better systems, better software, more environments, more tools, we can now do so much more to make things easier for users.
Right. I wasn't thinking about the limitations of programming back in the day.
Right. Well, when I first started in software, which was in the mid to late 1990s. Mid to late 1990s.
Right.
We had these form fields where people would input data into an application, but we didn't have enough memory in the system to run the application, maintain a connection to the database, and have all of the fields be input fields. So they were just painted on the screen. It was just a picture. And then whatever field the user tabbed or clicked their mouse into, we just moved the input field there and said, okay, well, where are you? Okay, that's that field. When you submit the data, now it's that. But it was just one field that moved around. It wasn't like all of the fields were active. You couldn't tell because, it was active when you needed it to be.
Right. Yeah. And I'm thinking when I was in college and I started using a Mac and you could just, it was intuitive. Wow. It was a wow.
Oh, well, and they've been such a trailblazer in terms of user experience. And, it's funny because that's where a lot of the disruption in the design industry is coming from. experiences that people are having well outside the context of, their banking software or how they log in and see what their benefits and what medical plan they have is. It's being informed by mobile phones and tablet experiences and the fact that you can watch a movie while you're on an airplane. There are so many things that now people experience. And as they do, it kind of colors their experience for, well, how should this work? Well, if I just have some horrible old form or something that just feels like a 20-year-old interaction with something, people have a tendency to go, oh, that's quaint. It's not,
Right.
It's really not how we do that anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, could you characterize like the state of UX now?
We're still in a point where we are just expanding in scale. And so there's a lot to the DesignOps world that finds a mirror or an amalgam in DevOps, which kind of came about 10 years earlier than DesignOps because development was more mature. But what DevOps discovered was, as we had more applications to support, as we had more environments to support them in, as we had more interaction, having someone in the office at 11:58 at night to copy files from this server to this server, and now the new version of the application is live, doesn't quite cut it in terms of how you roll out a new version or a new application or, almost anything. There is a science to it, and it involves communication internally, externally. And so the old world of development was just like, hey, yeah, here, we put the software on a disk. You just run it on the server. It'll install itself. It's super easy. Just copy this here, then change the name of this file and, replace it with this newer version. And so invariably, it just was a world where there was a lot of opportunity for problems to occur. And they did. DesignOps is really kind of at that same inflection point in terms of what the state of UX is, because UX has been successful solving problems for users, coming up with a methodology that says, well, I don't know the answer when you ask me the question. I'm going to go ask a bunch of people who deal with this every day what their experience is. And when they explain that to me, I can kind of, I can answer that question then. And so as we did that and built that process and built strings of successes within organizations, we were asked to be involved in more parts of the organization. Oh, yeah, you know what? Marketing's doing something over here. If you could give us input in terms of users and personas. And well, actually, there's 3 other teams working on development stuff. If you could maybe help them frame up how that should look or work. But in the past, UX a lot of times got lumped in with look and feel. That's the look and feel of it. That's choosing the color of the button or where it goes. And it's a lot more than that. And especially as you see the successes that we can have and the impact that we can drive. The scale that we're growing to has meant that, you can't have 12 different teams working on 12 different problems in 12 different silos and expect anything but a mess of continuity. It would almost be like you're trying to make a movie and you have 12 different on-location teams, but you're not telling them what time of year the story takes place in, what time of day the shots are. And so when you look at the movie put together, it could have been great if there was coordination amongst the teams. Instead, you're like, I thought it was morning when the car chase was happening, but they just parked in the warehouse and it's dark outside. I don't understand. And so that's sort of a good analogy for where the state of design is now we have these 12 teams on location working with their little subgroups. But it's brought about the need to centrally coordinate kind of those efforts so that you can maximize, the gain from them and you can get the best benefit. I think probably the best example experience that I ever had was when I was working at the time, it was Wuxi Nextcode, Genuity Science now, but it was really involved in designing tools for exploring the human genome to diagnose rare pediatric disease, all the way up through research level population, like why do people of this descendancy have this specific medical problem? What's that about? To commercial type experiences. And we had teams in Cambridge, Mass., Reykjavik, Iceland, and Shanghai, China. So like not quite a 24-hour a day design cycle, but like 23 or 21, I think is what it was when you looked at the overlap between teams. And so we had different cultures that were coming into play. We had different time requirements just in terms of the reality of meeting, how you express things, how do teams interact, how do you manage the cultures of teams interacting. So there was sort of a lot of things going on. And one of the biggest things that we did to help was to start to integrate DesignOps and say, okay, regardless of what you're doing it, when you're doing it, for whom you're doing it, this is how we do this. Now, that may not express itself exactly the same in China as it does in the US or in Reykjavik or somewhere else, because we needed to come up with a design system that talked more about what are the things we need to communicate. And that could be internal or external. What do we need to tell developers who are going to build this? What do we need to tell support who's going to support it? What do we need to tell, there's a lot of ramifications on a lot of levels for that particular question. But it has been that increasing scale, increasing design complexity that has really driven this need to say, okay, we can't have the Wild West forever at a certain point, right? Like the border closes and, now we got to start talking boundaries and we got to figure out how we're all going to get along. And again, it all goes back to impact for the organization.
Wow. Now, do you ever have friction with if there's a business analysis group? Because it does seem like some of it overlaps like a little bit.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and friction. Friction can be bad or good, right? It can potentially slow down teams, but it could stop a car from getting in an accident. So there's pros and cons to friction, right. But yes, and trying to get them to understand that we want to work with them, that especially from a requirements, a user stories perspective, from the design side, we very much want the designs we make to, one, respond to what the users say that they need, and so we're sort of the marriage between, well, this is what the institution or the organization says it needs, and this is the order in which it needs to be acquired to keep all of the systems happy. Because there's a way that things move through the information systems of an organization. Just, someone put this into a form online. Well, it's 2023. That didn't just drop into an email to someone somewhere. It notified 7 other systems, and now actions are underway. Things are happening, emails are generated. There's a lot that could go on behind just a simple web form. And so it's always to make sure that if we're making a change, it's because users have expressed a desire that they would like to encounter the information or the workflow in a particular way, and it's meaningful or important. And so, as long as we ultimately give Caesar what is Caesar's and we can hand over those data points when you need them, what we do internally in the UX and the UI is a little bit more flexible than, what might have been written into the requirements. And a lot of times that is when someone's in a workflow and you're like, well, because of the way the backends work, they need to submit this, this, and this. Okay, totally understand. Yeah, that's not how people think. And so they're never going to start with this. And if we start there, they're going to think it's weird and wrong, and they're not going to want to do it. And so you're just going to get more phone calls, which is the reason for developing this thing. So, at the end of the day, eyes on the prize, we want to get rid of those phone calls. So why couldn't we put this piece of information first and collect it? Doesn't mean we have to submit it. What if we just held on to it for a little bit, maybe, until they finish that other piece, and then we can put it all through. Or, well, what if we had them do this step and then jump into a workflow? Or, and it's really understanding sort of what are their top line cares, in terms of what matters to them at the end of the day. And, is it requirements, or is it following a user stories? Is it following a workflow? Just because there's a lot of ways to describe how all of these systems interact and work together. So it's always helpful to understand their perspective point of view when, like, no, it's the data. It's just, we have to have this bit before that bit. Oh, okay. So it's not this whole like set of 4 forms in this big giant workflow. It's actually the way these 2 fields interact and the fact that they're on this different pages now. Okay, great. Now that we've actually identified what is the real delta between what you need and what I need for the users. And then, let's figure out a way that we can accomplish both goals, because very rarely are things really and truly mutually exclusive where you're like, yeah, that can't work that way, or that can't happen. And so outside of that rare occurrence, it's really trying to figure out, okay, well, what's the best way to fit these pieces together where we have the biggest overlap between what the user wants and what the inside of it needs. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. It seems like relationships are key then to make all of this work.
And especially if you're remote, because, if you're in the office and around everyone, it's great that you can hear a lot of the conversations that go on about a topic, an area, this thing that you're working on that gives you additional context, additional color, additional understanding, that can be very, very useful. And when you're remote, like, you don't have cafeteria conversations with people. There's no, there is no, formerly the water cooler, right? That doesn't really exist when you're remote. So my experience has been you have to insert yourself. And, sometimes it's, just hey, I think I'd benefit a lot from hearing the conversation of you talking about which of these 2 things is more important and what we're going to do. Can I just come in and be a fly on the wall? And invariably ask dumb questions so that I can, make sure I understand it. It is, it's interesting how much communication and relationships, making sure that people understand when you ask a question, it's not because it's about you or what you want. It's that you've literally heard something that people have said repeatedly in a story, that they tell you, that gives you the insight to say that, no, it should be this way. And, I would say that that's probably one of those core things that, like, if you wanted to be a designer, if you wanted to get into UX, you first and foremost have to be curious and have to want to understand the situation that you're working on or engineering to. And in that way, it's different than like art, where you're like, I have a vision in my head of what this should be, how it should work, how it should look, and I'm going to bring that about. And that's awesome, but it's not exactly the same thing, because, ours starts with that curiosity. And I think one of the common misconceptions about UX is that, you just ask people what they want. And I can honestly say in 25 plus years of doing user interviews, I've literally never asked someone what they want. What I do ask is, hey, we're here to talk about blah. Can you tell me a story of, when you've experienced that? How did it impact you? What was your day-to-day experience with that like? And it's that, the difference there is profound, because I collect stories that people tell me about a situation, an environment. We would like to learn about how people think about insulin pumps for type 1 diabetics and, whether or not they'd consider artificial insulin. Okay, well, let's go out and talk to a number of people who have diabetes about what do they think? Did you ever have one? Yeah. What was that experience? Tell me about that. I'd love to hear about that. And when you get enough of those stories, you start to hear the common elements and the pain points. And, oh, yeah, you could solve this problem over here, but it's not really a problem. And another sort of classic example from one of the other worlds that I work in the medical world, is people always want to help physicians and clinicians get rid of their fax machine. And whether it's through their EHR, EMR, or an online portal or whatever, we'll get them to fill in the form. We'll allow them to do it somewhere else. And at the end of the day, the fax isn't a problem in the medical office. Everyone knows how to use the fax. They know how to fill in a form. They know how to put it in the thing and punch in the button, the number, and send it. So although it could be a time savings to do it in some other format, unless it's going to be truly intrinsically in line with the doctor as they're talking to the patient and collecting that information. And, AI's getting there, but it's not there yet, especially in a medical context where you really need to be specific. But as you go through that and collect that, that's probably the only way to ever get rid of that fax machine. Because, when you talk to technical people, they're like, we got to get rid of that thing. And when you talk to users, they're like, I don't know why everyone wants to get rid of that thing. It works just fine. And it is just kind of that disconnect between, what a business or a technology wants, because they're like, we don't want to have to manage the fax machine. We would love to turn our fax machine off. So if we could do that, and you're like, yeah, but you can't really turn off the fax machine because they just, to be honest, it's just as fast as anything else. And they've been doing it for years.
Right.
But it is that, what comes out of those user stories when you get people to just honestly tell you about their experience.
That's better probably than directly asking, because they may think that they want something.
Oh.
But then when you hear this story about it, it's just, right. Not that they're not being honest, but it's their experience.
Exactly. And, and people's experience is limited by their experience, which is kind of an odd saying. But there's a famous quote in the UX field from Henry Ford. And if I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. And a stronger horse that can pull a bigger cart. They would have asked for, but they never would have asked for an automobile.
Right.
And so, but when you get them to tell you the story about, that I had to get on the horse and it rained and, so I had to slow down and it took me an extra hour to get there. Okay. It should operate in the rain. That's a neat one. But it's that, being open to what they tell you and honestly, and then believing it. Because you will get a lot of pushback, we're experts. We don't know if that's true or not. And you're like, I don't know. I talked to 30 people and 82% of them all said this one same thing. So I think it could be an impactor in the situation.
Right. It's true. It's funny just going back to the fax for a minute. Maybe people in the medical office can use it, but when they want their customers outside of the office, because something that is a pain point for people who, when my doctor says to fax something, not everybody has a fax.
I know, right? I know. Yeah. It is, right? Yeah, you can fax that in. Can I?
Right.
It's 2023. I'm not entirely certain I know where to start that journey.
Right. My parents have a fax, but.
Yep. Yes, totally. That's my parents too. If we have to interact with something like a form or something along those lines. Yeah. Can fax that to us.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I think my printer does that.
Right. Right. It's true. The printer, and I have something on my computer just for that purpose. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yes. It's a very specific tool.
Yes, it's true. So it made me laugh that you picked that example, and you're saying that the people internally don't want to change it. I'm like, it needs to change.
I know, right? Just, intrinsically, you're like, but that's so wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
And, but it is when you get that outside information and you're like, well, but your customers are saying they'd like to understand what's the progress of this. once they've submitted it, what happened next? What's the step after? Is it on track? Is someone working on it or looking at it? What's going on? And when I fax it to you, I lose all ability to even vaguely engage in that conversation with those people.
Right. And they probably want it that way.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we'd rather not have to make updates. Well, and you do see a rise of tools now that are intermediaries that sort of work with LIMS or laboratory systems or other things like that will provide you with access to tracking. There's a company called Lumea that does a really great job with having basically integrated a tracking system based on user experience and talking to people about what they needed and said, if you put a chip in here and then had a reader, when this thing gets to each step along the journey, it has a check in and check out. So we could just collect that and then surface it up to people and they know exactly where it is in the process. And you're like, really? A chip and a reader? Like, we've had this problem for how long, for how many people, and fantastic solution, but wow, that's surprisingly obvious.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes so you see it, you don't realize it was right there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and that sometimes simple solutions to complex problems are really exactly what you're looking for.
Right. And just to go back to if somebody wanted to get into this field, so you say curiosity is the most important. What else would be important?
It's not just like a curiosity. It is the desire to understand how others think about things. Because that's really when design gets a solution or gets a problem right, it's because we understood how the people who are dealing with that problem think about that problem, and we architected the solution around that. And so you have to intrinsically care about the people who are using the software. And so, it is a unique mindset within software because it's not product so much saying, well, to expand market share and what would be good for the business and, or engineering, like, boy, we really need to think about replatforming. So if we could not put any of these types of things in for the next, 18 months, that would be fantastic. It is thinking about well, I know you want the data in that order, but that doesn't work for people. And we can explain to you why, and now we'll figure it out. I always go back to, it's kind of one of the funny things that I find helpful is my university background was in political science with minors in philosophy and justice studies.
Wow.
And you never ever really design anything that has just one side to it. It's just for Tina in Des Moines, Iowa, who's 32 and needs to answer the following 6 questions. Like this, that's not the problems that design gets called in to work on. It's more, well, we have questions, some of which are required, some of which are optional, and we need to understand, how we can frame this for someone who's 18 and someone who's 87. And, and males and females and people from this economic segment to this economic segment. So you're always constantly balancing all sorts of requirements and needs and what's right for the user. And, almost from that philosophy point of view, being able to understand and balance all of those different needs so that you really sort of solve the most of each of those problems, because you can never solve all of them, because if you solve all the problems for one group, you're doing it wrong and that doesn't last. So you really do have to solve business problems and product problems and technical problems and user problems, and being able to understand how to balance and weigh. I know users need that, but we have to put that off until we've done this technical thing. It's going to be 6 to 12 months, and that is just the way that it is. And you have to be able to understand how to make those decisions and, then have a fallback plan on, well, what's the next best thing for my users? So, yeah, I think, those are sort of the core features that make someone successful in the space.
So how did you get into user experience design?
So I was actually teaching software at a software company, and it was in a particular vertical. And we would literally spend 3 weeks over 6 months showing these people how to use the software to run a business they've been running successfully without software for years and years and years. And so there were always these points where you'd be like, okay, I want you to reorder the contacts because, it's a business and this person moved on to something else. We'll keep them in the system, but move them down because we don't really talk to them much. And so we want to move other people up. And you would have to go 3 windows deep. And you're like, I'm in this third spreadsheet. Why? I was in a spreadsheet and then I was in another one. Now I'm in another one. And, engineering's like, well, these are your contacts that you have access to. These are the corporate ones that those people have access to. And then these are the ones that you just can't touch. And you're like, that's great. No user on planet Earth is going to understand why they had to do this. Could we maybe not just not allow you to move the ones you can't move? And just, for that person, you put their contacts the way they ordered them above those others. If they can't call those other people, why do they have to be at top of their list? And it was asking questions like that. And all of a sudden I had the chief technical officer at my cube saying, why are you harassing my developers? And I remember going back and saying, I don't think that's what I'm doing, and he made a comment of I understand what you're saying. And, it's not that you're wrong about a lot of these things, but it's, more complicated than you might think, blah, blah, blah. And, ultimately, do you think you could do a better job designing it? And I made some smart aleck comment as a young person in my career may. I think a monkey could do a better job designing it, and I was thinking of an infinite number of monkeys sort of environment, or one of them writes Shakespeare. It's kind of what we have now. At least if one of them spoke English, that would be someone in the room speaks English. That'd be a huge step forward. And got the pat on the back and congratulations, you've got a new job.
Wow.
And so I moved into the design side of it. And really it was more about design, less about users. But I had 2 years of speaking with people trying to use the system and, asking, well, what don't you understand? Why is this hard for you? And okay, well, it's because the manual system, we do this, this, and this, but this wants me to do this, that, and this. And you're like, oh, well, it totally makes sense. It's out of order for you because that's not how you think about it. Okay, good to know. And so I had a lot of user context prior to engaging in design to basically work on an enterprise level system that, there was enough problems to go around. And so I had heard feedback about every area of the system. And it was really probably 3 years before we had gone through all the areas of the system. And I had started to actually add a system internally to be able to go out and talk to users, to talk to people using the software, talk to the trainers. What are people saying? What are the comments? What's hard to use? To start to cycle new information, fresh information back into the process.
So you sort of almost fell into it. Was it called user experience then, or design, or was it called something?
No, and it's funny. The company that I worked for at the time, that was one of the hardest things that we had to do with my position. It was easy to create. It was super hard to get a title and then to base any sort of competitive compensation package around, because it was like, well, we don't know anyone else doing this. And so it took a little while to finally have a number of other companies that came out of or spun out of or were at marketing, advertising agencies, occasionally a few software companies, but more on the web side of things and web apps and things like that. It started to become more of a everyone had the same problem, which is engineers, wonderful people, must solve problems that, are presented, but the key or the thing that gets them excited is solving the problem, not making it easy for a user to actually go through the process. That's sort of, at the time, at least, was a much more of a secondary kind of an issue. And that's why, it took people saying yeah, but nobody can do it. So, based on it's not happening. And, but they can do it in the system. Right. But can they? Technically it's possible. Sure. Technically I could run a 4-minute mile, but can I? No. The honest answer is no, not with a lot of training and other human intervention to get you to that point, which is why software training took so long, why there really weren't transferable skills when you moved from this application to that application. Again, because there wasn't any kind of centralized effort at any level to talk about, the confluence of all these problems that we're having. And that's kind of where UX sprung up, was like, wait a minute, you're having that problem too? I'm having that problem. That's great. I mean, it's not great, but let's, at least now we have someone to commiserate, talk to, and talk about, how these things are happening. What's not working? Why don't these, why did that effort fail?
Right. Do you belong to any UX groups?
I'm in the User Experience for Life Sciences. It's part of a Pistoia Alliance group. And I actually spoke at their conference in England a couple of years ago, as we mentioned earlier. But they're specifically focused around user experience in the life science space, because life science tools are traditionally super important and critical to be able to use and use successfully, because healthcare, lives, little things, but they're impossibly complicated. And traditionally, it's because the people designing and building them, putting them together, were the scientists who came up with the science behind doing something. As such, scientists look at other scientists or their tools and say, oh, it should do everything, because you're smart enough to be able to figure out how to do everything. So you'll find this, you'll see it, you'll know how to do it. And, like a lot of software that they just kept putting functionality after functionality and menu item after menu item. At a certain point, you're like, this isn't easier for me, because I do 7 things. I make text bold, I change the size and color, and I put little boxes on things. That's what I do. I don't use those 3,200 other features you thoughtfully put in, because you knew how, someone once wanted it. And again, that's kind of where user experience came in, was saying okay, well, we can offer all of these, but are they all really the same level of ask or need? Do people use this at the same rate they use that? And you hear, oh no, that's 1 in a million. People never do that. And you're like, okay.
Right.
So maybe it doesn't belong in the big menu of really important things, because at a certain point, more options is not better. Fewer focused options, the right options, because you talk to people and said, hey, what do you need to do with this information? What are you looking for? What does it need to tell you? Oh, okay, great. So you want to be able to add, edit, blah, 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 whatever it is. You're not looking to put together, this giant list, that's a once a year function. Great. We'll put it in a once a year place. Not the most important thing when you log in every day and you're like, I don't even do that for 7 months. I have no idea why that's there.
Right. That's so interesting. Yeah. I think UX is fascinating and so important. But just to change tracks, so you have a very creative family. Yeah. And I know that in May, your daughter Stella is graduating from Elle Makeup Institute. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did. Okay. Yeah. Licensed makeup artist. And she actually just finished hair, which is, not just the way you traditionally think about it, but wig master type hair, RuPaul Drag Race type hair.
Right.
Like hair. And now she's working on body painting, and then it's special effects. And really, she wants to work in film. And she's actually, because she got licensed for makeup first, she's already worked on 3 films. Wow. And she has 2 more already set up, which, is a fantastic way to start to work your way in, into that world. So, wow. Yeah, very proud, very so much more focused. I still laugh at, when my kids ask, I'm like, when I figure out what I want to do when I grow up, I'll let you know. In the meantime, I really love to solve problems, and there's a lot of those. So that's what I get to do. But I'm amazed at how much more focused and, knowing what she wants to work on and what she wants to do, and doing something that she's not only talented at, but actually really, really enjoys. Like, that's just phenomenal to see.
That is very lucky, right? When you can make something you love your career.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And, and understanding that there was something out there that like fit for what you really love to do. Although it's funny, my wife and I joke that both of our sets of parents, like, she wanted to go to art school, and her parents were like, what could you do with that? And we always joke, I'm like, I wish I had known, because like when I worked in advertising, there were artists all over the place. Oh, you want a degree in English? What are you going to do with that? Oh my gosh, there are copywriters everywhere. Stuff needs to be written all the time. And similarly, like with makeup, we happen to live just outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. And so like, she's already done a wedding, but we have like, 30,000 weddings a year, or some insane number of weddings in the Las Vegas Valley. So like, even just being able to do that and do makeup, there's a career there for you.
Right. And your son is at UNLV Film School?
Yeah,
so creative, right? It must be genetic.
It's funny because like in the family, I'm like, I'm the only one who's not creative. And they're like, you literally like do creative stuff all the time. You've been making things up out of thin air. Like you designed an innovation lab. Like, what are you talking about? But I'm like, but you want to make movies. You do like these crazy makeup things. And but my son is he's a junior at UNLV, and got a full scholarship this year, which was fantastic.
Wow.
Because he was doing so well in his major. And actually every weekend, really since the first of the year, he's been working on some production with, real equipment, and, act like it's an actual film with actual people. And so like being able to see him in his element, working with lighting or angles for shooting and cinematography and things like that. Like just seeing him do something that he's excited about and enjoys also is like, as a parent, you're like, yes, that's fantastic. That took me forever to get to. How did you shortcut that, by the way?
Right. I guess maybe all the opportunities there, or
yeah. Well, I think it was good that from a young age, if they said, this is what I want to do, instead of like saying, like some of our parents did back in the day, no, that's dumb.
Right. How are you going to make a living with that, right?
Yes, exactly. Right. Like we always said, well, that's great. Find something you love and then figure it out from there. Because there are a lot more jobs and a lot more opportunities than you think there are. And it's easy to put yourself into a box before you need to. Let the world do that. The world has no problem. So don't do it to yourself.
That's true. Yeah. And your wife has a book coming out, right? She's an author.
Yes.
Look at this family. You guys are unbelievable.
I know it is. It's phenomenal. And it is kind of a crazy year. This has been pretty amazing. But yeah, May 23rd, her novel Love Lost on Cloud 9 comes out, and it's available for pre-order on Amazon. So it will be available paperback as well as ebook or EPUB for Kindle and all those things. But yeah, it's a phenomenal story. And it's set in 1978. So there's a lot of great cultural references. There's a lot of great music. And really it's a story. It's a story about a newlywed couple that moves to Southern New Hampshire. And he's a DJ at the local radio station. She's going to be a stay-at-home spouse at the time. And he comes up, buys the house early, as would happen, and he buys a house next to an abandoned amusement park. Because, for him, that was no big deal. It was cheap. We got a great deal. This place is awesome. And then as they move in and they're in the house and meet neighbors, they start discovering more and more things and more secrets, and that there's a lot more going on, underneath Cloud 9, which is actually the name of the amusement park is the Cloud 9 Amusement Center or Cloud 9 Family Fun Center, something along those lines. But it's one of my favorite things about a story is when, even if it's late at night, it's 1 a.m. and I'm reading and I'm like, I still just can't put it down. Like, I just want to read one more chapter. I just want to read one more chapter. And like from like a third of the way in on the book, I'm like, just another couple pages, just another couple pages. And I just kept going because it was just so enjoyable. And as someone who solves problems for a living, I see the end of most movies and novels that I read. It's very rare to surprise me. And when you understand the structure of stories and narratives and what's satisfying to humans, like there's some rules. And once you know the rules, you can start to see the formation. But what I loved was at the end, there was a surprise that I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not see that coming. That's phenomenal. Like, you completely shocked and surprised me. And I just love that. So yeah, that comes out May 23rd. And very excited. She's in the process of getting all the marketing and the PR stuff ready. And it's from a small press called Hummingbird Press here in Las Vegas.
Well, if you have a link, I'll put it in the show notes so people can check it out. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Absolutely.
Good. Yeah. Kirk, this was amazing. Do you have a parting thought?
I do really. And it's sort of about the nature of UX itself and then design ops. And really, in the world of UX, it is, don't ask them what they need. Because again, going back to Henry Ford, they would have told me a faster horse. Let them tell you a story about their experience. And as you gather those stories, you start to hear the common points across those stories. And boy, people use this word an awful lot when they talk about this. People always bring up this point of this process as being really problematic and they don't like it. Well, when enough people tell you that, that's what the truth is, and then accept it. And so really gather the truth and then accept the truth so that you can execute on it. And that's really the core of user experience. And for DesignOps, it's figuring out how you have to tell the stories as a group, as a team, at the biggest level, to make sure that you're all communicating with the same language. And it could be design language, it could be verbiage, semantics, design systems. It could be a lot of different things. An example for a company that I worked with a number of years ago was making sure that all the people who were working on things that had color had the same lights. Because the lights in this office in San Francisco were very different than the lights over here where someone was working in Austin, Texas. And so when they were coloring things, like, it looked great to them. And then you put stuff side by side or printed it out and you're like, why is this not the same color? And they're like, well, I used a blue that looked right. Okay, well, there's a blue that is right. Not the ones that look right. A lot of blues could look right, but there's one blue that is right. Let's use that from now on. And really thinking about all of your processes under the same lens is really the core of what DesignOps and DesignOps thinking is all about.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for making the time today.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for letting me ramble, on these, long-winded stories. I get very excited about the world of UX. And so it's fun to try and communicate that with others.
Wonderful. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Tech Talent Today, brought to you by Clearmont Technologies IT Staffing and Search. You can find out more at clearmonttech.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share. See you next time.